The flow of time is absolute, and just like everything else in this known universe, Dragon Ball Super is no different. Beautiful friends, the inevitable moment that was sure to become upon us is finally here. The end of Dragon Ball Super, and I'm here to give you my thoughts and analysis on the whole matter. In this video, I'll try to keep my analysis confined to this one episode since there's many things to talk about in this arc, but I would prefer to talk about that another time. So jumping in here to the final episode, 131 of Dragon Ball Super, we were left off with Jiren and the revelation that 17 and Frieza are still both alive and well, and willing to confront Jiren. In the case of Frieza, this wasn't that much of a surprise. Everyone anticipated this, since I believe this story decision was pretty well telegraphed in the previous episodes, where Frieza was mysteriously quote-unquote absent. Considering this is the Tournament of Power, if you're quote-unquote absent but not eliminated, you are still in play. Android 17, however, is a different case. It was a very genuine surprise to see him return here in this finale, something that I definitely did not anticipate myself. He was presumed dead in the previous episode. Both of the pieces are here to confront the final and biggest and baddest antagonist, Jiren. Through a quick succession of attacks and teamwork, Android 17 and Frieza are actually a pretty formidable fighting force against the weakened Jiren. This is where I want to actually praise this episode's action and animation, and especially its storyboarding, which in terms of quality is definitely some of the best that Dragon Ball Super has ever had. Obviously, having planned out your action sequences and having them well coordinated and choreographed helps facilitate in the creation of a good fight scene, which this final episode definitely shows in that effort. 17 and Frieza quickly overpower Jiren. It is at this point that Jiren hits his low point. He completely deflates. All sense of confidence and gravitas that he has completely evaporates from him. It is at this point that Toppo stands up, giving Jiren a pep talk of what Jiren standed for, about what Jiren believed in, and what he thought about himself. One thing I really like about this whole thing is that we've seen these kind of inspirational talks throughout this arc that our heroes have gone through. However, this is one of the first times that one of the antagonists has gotten a similar speech for motivation, which is something that I really appreciate. Toppo's speech does not appeal to the principles of our heroes. You have to keep in mind that what this arc is trying to do is juxtapose what Jiren believes in to what Goku and Vegeta and the rest of our heroes believe in, and how they go about trying to save the universe. And of course, they have differing philosophies. One thing I like about Toppo's speech is that he doesn't appeal to our hero's morality. He appeals to the principles that Jiren has, and that right now at the very moment that Frieza is pointing his death beam at Jiren, Jiren is not living up to the beliefs that he holds for himself. And that's something I really like. Toppo really kicking him in the rear, reminding Jiren of what you believe in. Although I like the dynamic of Toppo reinvigorating Jiren, one thing I do feel this moment suffers from is that I think that there should have been much more struggle for Jiren to come to this point. This is something that's going to be a continuing flaw of this episode, but I feel as though the pacing was a bit rushed to get Jiren to the point of him giving up. I'm perfectly fine with the concept of 17 and Frieza overpowering Jiren, even a weakened Jiren. It doesn't bother me that much, but in order to facilitate a good narrative and build good drama, I feel as though the conflict that Frieza and 17 found themselves in against Jiren should have been extended to give the conflict much more gravitas, to give it much more weight. So when Jiren finally does give up, the gravity of the situation can have a lot more impact. Reinvigorated by Toppo's words, Jiren goes on the offensive and puts 17 and Frieza on the ropes. It is then there that the battle-teared Goku makes his entrance into this episode, giving relief to both 17 and Frieza, and thus starts another dynamic that this finale really wants to hit home: the whole cooperation between Goku and Frieza. This is something I had uneasy feelings about, but something that when I thought about it, I did like in concept, although I felt there were certain things that were lacking. Throughout this whole entire arc, Frieza's loyalty to Universe 7 has always been tenuous. Frieza, obviously not being on the light side, has always been explicitly out for himself, and he's made it no secret. Everyone knows this. One theme that this tournament has had prevalent throughout is the theme of survivals, of self-preservation. We saw Toppo earlier in the arc give up justice, any sense of good justice in him, something that he held very dear to himself and his character, but he threw it all away for mere survival. Something that I actually did sympathize with, as if there's no existence at all, what good is justice then? And that's what the Tournament of Power seems like it's trying to do. It's trying to go beyond good and evil and focus on survival, hence the name, the Universe Survival Arc, which is perhaps why Frieza was included on the Universe 17, an evil character. So having all that background, we are now here in the finale, with Goku representing good and Frieza representing evil, who are both compelled to join forces, not out of any greater goal or greater truth, but just for mere preservation, something they both can understand, Frieza and Goku, on a mere basic, primal, visceral level. And I have to say that I like this concept. If there was ever a moment where Frieza would work together with someone like Goku, someone who he absolutely despises, it would be in a situation where he is forced because he is trying to protect his own existence. And although I think that this is a great concept, this point of self-preservation and survival is a little lacking here in this final moment. Perhaps it was because they didn't really nail this one down. They didn't develop this idea enough throughout the tournament in order for this to be a much more genuine moment than it feeling a little bit forced. And what I mean by that is I believe that the concept of mere survival should have been developed and cultivated a lot more throughout this arc, and so it could really hit home to the viewer. Perhaps this is just my tastes. I'm fully aware that hammering home one idea or one theme might be a little bit too intrusive for this arc or for any arc in Dragon Ball. However, I feel like it wasn't hammered home enough for it to really hit home what is happening here at the end, for Goku and Frieza to be teaming up in this manner. Regardless of that, the team up between Goku and Frieza results in the elimination of both of them and Jiren, making Android 17 the winner of the entire tournament, which is something that is a very genuine surprise to me and of course many other people, considering the fact that 17 being alive at all was a surprise in itself. Obviously 17 being alive and winning the whole thing is another thing I just didn't see coming. But even before 17's supposed death, I'm pretty sure no one would have expected at the beginning of this thing that 17 was going to be winning the tournament. So we move on to the wish, and it's something that quite frankly is the exact opposite of surprising. Something that I predicted and many other people did as well. 17 wishes for all the other universes to be brought back. Although many people had very strong feelings and opinions about this one decision, I didn't. My assessment was a little bit more milquetoast. Although I really wasn't ecstatic about the wish, it's not something I genuinely hated either. Now the reason why I feel a little bit milquetoast about this wish is because what this tournament was about was the convictions of the characters, and it relates to what I said earlier. One of the biggest themes about this tournament was survival, mere existence, and what most of these characters were fighting for, whether it was from our universe or other universes, it was all about the convictions these characters had and what they thought protecting was most important. If you remember, to Ribrianne it was her concept of love and preserving that. To Gohan and Vegeta, it was their own family members. For Frieza, it was for completely selfish motives, just for mere self-preservation, so then he can then have opportunities to do evil things in the future. I understand that that's what the tournament ultimately was trying to be about, but was it really justified in being that? It sort of seems, why have a tournament at all? It seems like the justification for this tournament was pretty flimsy, especially when you view it from inside the world, because from outside the world, we can say, oh, it was about introducing these characters and fleshing them out and what they believe and what the strength of their convictions were. But what's the point? What was the point of the tournament? That's why I feel a bit mixed about the wish, about just reversing everything. And it is at this moment that we get nice little shots of all the universes and the revived fighters. We get a nice little speech about Jiren and how he has changed and perhaps what his hopes for the future were. It is at this moment that I think that the episode should have ended, and an epilogue episode should have then commenced on from there. Now I'm going to talk about pacing. The pacing of this episode up to this point, up to the point of Jiren making his little comments about hopes for the future, I think the pacing was actually pretty well. Aside from Jiren hitting his lowest point, which I felt was a bit rushed, everything else was nicely paced. There weren't any superfluous reaction shots that took up precious episode time from this episode. It was all nicely paced out, and that every action felt like it was justified. However, past this point, everything else was just on fast forward, with everyone trying to savor the moment and savor their own victory and their own survival. I thought that deserved a lot more longevity than it was. The biggest offender of all this is that at the very end, we get a montage of everyone's actions after the tournament, which I felt was a very, very cheap way to just flatten everything out as fast as possible without really giving us any real substance. Which in my opinion is probably the biggest blunder this episode made, is not giving these characters that we have just spent a lot of time with in this arc proper closure, a proper conclusion to what happened in the end of this arc. But oh well, maybe it was scheduling issues or just the fact they couldn't have one more episode, but I really feel that this ending could have really been helped if all that epilogue material could have been expanded upon in another episode. But there you go, guys. Those are my thoughts about the ending of Super. And for the most part, guys, I really did enjoy it. I thought it was definitely one of the better Dragon Ball Super episodes. In terms of animation, how it visually looked, I definitely think it was. In terms of that fight, everything else seemed on the upper standards of what Super could be. The only thing I could really fault the episode is that it just didn't feel like a proper conclusion. It didn't feel like it was really putting everything to a close. Something that the Dragon Ball anime, the Z, GT, even GT, those final episodes felt like this was the end. They always had a very real sense of sentimentality that those endings had. All of them, the GT, Z, and Dragon Ball endings, they all had that in them. You know, maybe that's because there's the movie and there's the real possibility that Super is going to come back next year, and maybe that's the reason it felt this way. That's the sense I got, especially since it felt like it was kind of hanging around loose threads, like with Frieza being at the end set loose into the galaxy and Goku and Vegeta's little fight at the end. It just felt like they were purposely leaving out in the open. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. But until next time, guys, I'm Blackenfist, and I'm out, man.